Hello, my name is Kirioth, and firstly I apologise for the voice. It's mostly gone, but apart from that I'm okay, and I want to record, so I'm doing it anyway. It sounds terrible, I know, don't worry about it, it'll go eventually. So today we are going to talk about Bloat, Codex Bloat specifically, and to be even more specific, Space Marine Bloat, because Space Marines do have the largest number of units known to man in any capacity. Oh dear God, there are so many options at this point, it's absolutely ludicrous, and things could well get a little bit worse if you believe, if you believe Bell of Lost Souls. Now, I'm just going to say straight away that the rumour that has sparked this video, it's both a rumour and not a rumour, plausible and completely pointless. So Bell of Lost Souls have said that industry professionals say, don't know what that means, that a new Codex Space Marines is slated for 2019, and it will include a number of new kits for Primaris Marines, a unit of high-speed one-man vehicles, a Primaris medium transport, Primaris small flyer, Primaris vehicle variant with new large turret weapon options, and a Primaris heavy infantry unit with assault terminator weapon equivalents. Essentially the vaguest possible wish list you could put into print without it looking like it was typed by a child. None of that really means anything, let's be honest, and saying that a new Codex Space Marines is slated for 2019 is remarkably vague, because 2019, much like every other year, is 12 fucking months long. So is it slated for middle of the year, first quarter, third quarter? Is it due to drop on Is it due to drop on the 31st of December of 2019? Who really knows? They're not saying, because that would be far too specific, which is one of the many reasons that I think this rumour is probably a load of old crap. But it does actually introduce an interesting topic. Now, we've talked about the fact that Primaris are going to slowly replace Standard Marines, and I've said that Primarius Calgar is the first stepping stone into that process happening. Also, full credit to Maka from the Outer Circle, who coined that phrase at the start of 8th. I thought I'd come up with it. No, of course I'm not that original. Someone else got there way before me. To be honest, other people have probably come up with it as well since then, but you know what I mean. Say this was to be true, this rumour, which I don't think it is. Saying there's going to be a new Space Marine Codex is not exactly the most outlandish prediction to make, is there? Say that this was true, and we did indeed see a unit of high-speed one-man vehicles like Primaris jet bikes, which personally I think is pretty much inevitable, or a Primaris medium transport, which again I would expect to see at some point. A Primaris flyer, I don't know, we've already got a couple of those as it stands, although those ones may not be selling as well as Games Workshop wants, so we could see more of those. If we just take this at face value, there are 5 new entries to go in a new Space Marine Codex, should one be released in 2019 and nothing else changes. No other units go out of production, there are no standard Space Marine units that are removed. That would put the number of units in a Space Marines Codex at a ridiculous number, even worse than it currently is. That would introduce an extra 5 units to a codex that is already so completely rammed with options that, to me, it would become what could only be described as a little bit of a mess. I mean, how do you have that many units? This is the question. How do you have that many units in a single codex without multiple entries treading on each other's toes? As it is, we've already got loose equivalents, maybe not loose equivalents, so to speak, in some cases. It's actually a video that I'll link in the description from the Outer Circle, where does a really good response to my video talking about the replacement of Standard Marines with Primaris, and some of the things actually I've overlooked, some of the things I think I looked at a bit too simplistically. There are some interesting non-equivalent Primaris units in terms of what they do and how they don't specifically clash with anything standard. An example of that being the aggressors, which was pointed out. But if we take this as it is, you would end up with a codex with so many entries that it would be almost impossible to take. Well, it would be impossible to take all of them. As it stands, I think you are hard-pressed to take one of everything. That's not really something that's very feasible, even for people who only buy stuff because they like the look of them rather than the actual performance. A Space Marine Codex at the moment, should one come out with added Primaris units, would be so completely beyond bloated that it would be massively inefficient. And it's one of the things that has made me actually wonder a little bit more about the slow replacement process. See, if we did get, just as an example, Primaris jet bikes, which I think is incredibly likely. I mean, we have the tech, the Custodes ride around on jet bikes all the time, and we have the Repulsor now, which is obviously a grav vehicle. The chances of Primaris bikers being on standard Space Marine bikes is incredibly slim. They are the best of the best, and so they will get the best of the best, which means flying shit. Those surely would massively clash with standard bikes. So if you were to put Primaris jet bikes in, especially if you think about as well, not just in terms of like conflicts, in terms of unit profiles and tabletop performance, but also kit age and kit popularity, I will go ahead and suggest that probably Space Marine bikes aren't massively popular these days. I know there are entire bike armies out there, but they are not the majority. I know there are dedicated White Scars players, but they are not the majority. The Space Marine bike is an ancient kit. It's old as hell. The last time I broke one open, I was genuinely staggered by the fact that I recognised it from years back. That's a kit that needs replacing. Now, you're not going to replace it with a standard Space Marine kit, but replacing it with a Primaris kit, a Primaris jet bike kit, a unit that fulfills a similar role, but would legitimately just be better. It could be faster, feasibly, because it's a jet bike, not a standard bike. It could be hardier, and in fact it would be hardier because it would have 2 wounds. You could end up with a just genuine replacement for the standard Space Marine bike. And so a little bit of bloat is avoided. Because now, I mean, say you would have to leave the unit profiles in, that would be fair, or indeed you would maybe take out the unit profile for the standard Space Marine bike and say that the previous Codex entry for units that are not in the new Codex are still valid, the same way that they do it with the Index. So if you had 2 squads of bikes, Space Marine, in fact 3, think about it, Space Marine Scouts and Primaris, you would have, I would say, a good 1 too many options there. So the way to avoid that bloat would be to get rid of it. It gets a little bit tricky when you look at things like Rhinos and Land Raiders, because a Primaris medium transport, it would contribute to bloat in a new codex if the standard Space Marines were still around, but it would be specific to Primaris, and as such, it would be in a weird situation whereby, yes, it would be yet another option, but then again, it's not an option for everyone. I mean, Games Workshop have done that very intentionally. They have cut down on the options for Primaris being able to take transports to just the Repulsor, so that you have to buy the Repulsor. It would be a similar situation whereby you would still have to buy this new medium transport. Would that still be bloat? It would still be bloat, but it wouldn't be fixable bloat. It wouldn't be something that could be resolved by taking away a unit and having it so that the old profile is the only one that you have available to use, as is done with the indexes, like the index units, stuff that you cannot get in the Codex anymore but still has an index entry. Similar thing with like a Primaris Flyer. Now the Storm Talon, the Storm Raven's the big one. I always get them confused. The smaller Space Marine Flyers aren't really that old. They've had a little bit of a renewal that, fairly recently, relatively recently, in having another option put on the board for them. But again, that would be a case of, what would a Primaris small flyer look like next to those? It would most likely fulfill similar roles. In fact, the way those kits are put together, the way those boxes are, the way those unit profiles are, I don't think there's a Primaris small flyer that you could make that wouldn't in some way step on the toes of the existing ones. And so that would be just added bloat. It's again a similar thing for when we start to see options for the Repulsor and the Redemptor. I don't think the current what we've got now, those chassis can be used for other weapons. They just haven't had new weapon profiles put on yet. There will come a point where you'll be able to take a Repulsor with all kinds of different weapons to what we have now. But if it's named as a different tank, which is possible, if there is another tank on the way, which is also possible, that would again severely contribute to bloat. This is where it's especially interesting for me when I think about just the general size of the Space Marine Codex. In terms of the options you have available, it is it's fairly far ahead of most of the other armies. I think actually Eldar has a decent amount of choice, but a lot of their stuff is not, well, like the models are ancient. Yeah, they don't have like much in the way of proper new sculpts and stuff like that. The Space Marines, not just from a wanting to get people to buy the new stuff perspective, but also just from an army composition perspective, they already have a lot of options, and a lot of their options do similar things. A lot of their options are vague equivalents or rough equivalents, or even the same but cost more for like a few more power weapons. I'm thinking about things like Assault Marines and Vanguard Veterans especially. You know, there's obvious crossover there. They are the same unit, it's just one of them is better equipped. If you then dump a Primaris equivalent on top of that as well, you either need to start taking stuff out or you need to start separating codexes out, because it will end up being that fucking thick and half the options will do the same thing. So does the Space Marine Codex continue to get more bloated as more Primaris stuff is introduced, or do we start to see in the next codex that certain standard Space Marine units don't make it in, that you have to use the old codex for their unit profiles because they're not in the new one? That way the book isn't too bloated, the options aren't too big, you can still use your old stuff, but slowly you would have to drop stuff or it would just end up being excessive, over the top, impractical. It's just an interesting thing to think about. Space Marines, I think, definitely do suffer a little bit from, if anything, a little too much choice. No, that's not fair. I don't think you can ever have too much choice, but when you're talking about picking units that are the best for what they do, I feel like Space Marines generally have a weird thing going on whereby you have these kind of, all these units that do similar things. You've got like Devastator Centurions that kind of do a similar thing to normal Devastators, except they do also have other options available that perhaps Devastators don't, but the crossover is quite big. Assault Marines, Vanguard Veterans, you've got all these different things that are kind of similar in a weird way. Just adding more onto that, it's just going to get a bit ridiculous, isn't it? So what's the best way to fix it? Dropping stuff that you no longer want people to buy, I guess, is the way to do it. Anyway, do you reckon that they will just continue adding stuff to Space Marine Codexes? As I say, this video, although it's kind of been in, like, come off the back of a rumour, the rumour is like vague and nonsensical to me. It's just like, there's going to be another Space Marines Codex in 2019. Great. Any details? No, none at all. Just vague wish listing. Okay, cheers. There is, of course, going to be a new Space Marines Codex. Obviously there is, but 2019 is not a time frame. Well, technically it is a time frame. It's just a really shit time frame that doesn't help anybody. Anyway, bloat. Space Marine Codex bloat. Bloating codexes in general. Too many options. Things that tread on each other's toes. What is the best way to fix it? Do you think the way for Space Marines will be essentially to start dropping standard Space Marine units as they're replaced with Primaris? Or do you think the codexes will just get bigger and bigger so that Games Workshop don't upset anyone? Let me know what you think in the comments down below. In the meantime, feel free to click any of this stuff. Don't worry, most of my other videos don't have my voice sounding like this. And I will see you for the next one. Toodaloo.